And this is what we were talking about, is needing to measure that. Because if I just look at the bars, if I have a failure in this hour, I'm not going to see that I had units still busy. And this was a great way for us to approach it. Here's our data that we dump into this integrated spreadsheet every day. Obviously, I hide a lot of other stuff in the spreadsheet with demand. And we're looking at the entire day. As a picture, we're plotting a bunch of data points. I don't really care if the staff understands this at all. I want them to be able to look at the graphic and say, oh, we didn't staff right, or we had a lot of 10-7 units. I want the mechanics to say, oh, what happened at 5 o'clock? I want the scheduler to say, yeah, at 10 o'clock we knew we were out of position. That's the kind of thing that really helps. And then when we have those days where something else happens, we use the root cause process to go back in and see what occurred here. So we put a little icing on that cake after we fine-tune things. I gave customer service to all my call takers because despite their impression that they were absolutely doing the best job that could be done, what I found is they hadn't ever had any formal customer service training for phones. So 98,500 calls coming in through the center, and you can get some fairly grumpy people. We gave the employees all PDSA training. So that's our model for quality improvement, plan, do, study, act. I'm sure you guys have similar models or you use the same model. We did that for all the employees so that we could at least speak in a little bit of a universal language about quality improvement and how it gets done. For key team members, we sent them through a lean training class to really get them a little bit more in depth, as an overview really, but a little more in depth on the concepts of value-added work, waste, and the other components. And then Excel and Access training for the management team members. Because things like the mega graphic, that wasn't something we just out of the book and figured out. That required some time and effort to sit and build the formulas and integrate all our data, from our RCSQL through to Crystal reports back through so we could draw them as Excel data exports. We developed that headcount dashboard so that we were in a position where we could say, okay, so we're moving into September, how many do we need to hire? What kind of PTO use are we going to need? Can we expand our PTO use because we know call volume is going to start to taper? Those kind of things that allow us to make very dynamic decisions instead of having an annual PTO bid in January and hoping that it gets us through, because that was the way we were doing business. And then we streamlined our hiring process because initially when we looked, and we actually had a group of consultants come in, we had an average from the time you applied to the time you actually were an employee working on the street of between 12 and 14 weeks. Way too long. We streamlined that down. Now it's running about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on your level of experience. So that was a good gain for us as well. And then we got real results. We reduced our overtime from 26% to 6%. We met our response time targets for 14 consecutive months, and that's still running. That kept our stakeholders happy. And now we had measurables to take to them and say, hey, you know how we've always been doing business? Let's contract. We're going to bring you this level of performance. Let's do a 3-year agreement. That helped us shoulder competition out of the market for both our non-emergency and our emergency business. So the Albuquerque Fire Department, Bernalillo County Fire Department, Village of Corrales, and then a lot of our non-emergency business partners, we brought them our metrics and said, here's what we will provide. Now that we've got a system in place and we know the math is right, let's contract, let's work out a deal. That obviously is huge for our financial sustainment. We sustained our budget target of 0.40, and we continue to move that target up because, like I said, 0.01 is a lot of money. And truly efficient systems can hit a 0.5. We have some challenges in the Albuquerque area with running the system that high, and the biggest is geographic. All our large hospitals are downtown. So even if I pick you up way on like the far east quadrant, I still got to take you all the way down to downtown. Casement's kind of a freestanding ER, and then Rust and Loveless West Side over on the far northwest corners aren't really seeing the volume that they should yet. And so we don't have a lot of choices. This is where we want to look at expanding or innovating the market, because one of the things we saw when we looked at it on a map is there is an urgent care everywhere we need to be. In large systems that run 0.5, they have a hospital all over the city. That way their unit can transport to the hospital and be back in service in relatively the same quadrant. It doesn't require the same kind of planning as me taking a unit from Fort Hills or even from Upper East Tramway area all the way to downtown and getting another resource out there, because I can't just beam them back and forth. As soon as you guys come up with that, by the way, let me know, because I will use it the next day. We'll even probably be willing to do some testing. But that allowed us, and this is the kind of thing that that our senior leaders group at Presbyterian loves to hear in discussion that allowed us to reduce our costs by about $500,000 annually. And we've continued to see that improvement.
So if you get a call from Belen Urgent Care, is it you guys that go pick someone up, or is it Belen Cross?
We actually use a call triage process to determine that. So a national standard of call triaging is done on the intake, and if it's what's called a code 3 response, a lights or sirens response, we will call them because they're closer.
Okay.
That's good clinical care.
But if it's not, then
if it's a stable patient, we take it.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do the same thing with Socorro Hospital, Espanola Valley Hospital, Lincoln County, Cibola, and those guys over there. So this is our garden now, and it still has needs, right? Got to water it, keep it maintained, but this was kind of how things shook out for us. And any questions?
Yeah, how do you balance your unit hour costs and your availability with employee times off? Because these people have to be alert.
This is a big challenge, and in fact, in addition to the pulse graphic that you see now, I had added another line, which is my ideal staffing line. If I could change staffing right now today, here's what it would look like. The problem is we're dealing with real people, you know, and you wouldn't like it if I called you every morning and was like, okay, today you're here at 8, and then the next day, I need you about 10:30. Or I'm not going to need you today, but hey, Friday, it's looking good for you. Now, we do manage that a little bit with on-calls and with our float pool.
Okay.
But really kind of balancing, what we do is we keep a core of our PTO use, and we use the headcount dashboard to tell us, okay, consistently here's what we can afford. And then when we see a seasonal variation, and what's lucky for us is seasonal variation occurs November, December, holiday months when people want more PTO. And so we get in a position where we can actually be the good guys and say, hey, you know what, we're moving into November, who wants some PTO? Good job this year, you guys. Who wants to be off the second week in November? You know, nobody's ever complained too much about that. So it's a challenge. You know, one of the things that we really struggle with is managing injury, kind of keeping our injury prevention low, and then how long injuries take. You know, if we have somebody that sustains a back injury, who can be out for an extended period of time, now we've got basically to pay somebody else to do that role, in addition to keeping the other person when they're finding light duty work for them. And another challenge are things like FMLA.
Okay.
You know, there is some predictability to what we see, but things like pregnancy, you know, that's not one that we can really chart out on the graph. There's some discussion about that. For now, we're not doing it. But it's an excellent question. And so, you know, what we did was we start with the core of what we know we can afford, and then we make it as dynamic as we possibly can to fit the needs of the organization.
And one of the pulses that I got to sit in and watch, and if you guys have a chance, they really are fascinating. They were plotting out with the model he had. They went out 2 days, so the 2 days from when I saw would have been Sunday, and said we won't need as much staff as we have scheduled currently. And they already knew some people who had sort of tentatively put in for time off, and so they were going to address and see if they could give them that time off so they wouldn't be as staffed on Sunday.
Okay.
And then the other thing they did, and he didn't have a picture, I was waiting to see if he would, when they do the runs, they actually have like a little ambulance that goes on that map. And so after they had the conversation about, and this one was somebody who took a wrong turn, then that manager who was sitting there then had explained to all the other managers what the root cause the day before had been and why the person had taken a wrong turn. It was because they had people beside them and couldn't get over into the lane they needed to make the turn they needed to, and so had to do a U-turn and then come back at it. But it really was kind of cool having that, and so everybody got to hear it. So it's not even just that they know what the root cause was, everybody else in the room does. And so then they're spreading that knowledge that way too.
I had worked in a medical setting early in my life, and nurses who were switched from relief shift to swing shift or day shift just weren't functioning well for a few days, you know.
Yeah, we actually, what we were able to do with the pulse and laying out our schedule with enough data was eliminate the need to do a full rebid, which was something that we used to do a couple times a year where we just cleaned the entire schedule, and then we started again from scratch in order of seniority and had people call and place them on shifts. That makes people very unhappy. You know, I want to be able to plan my childcare, I want to be able to plan my school schedule, and so what we did was, you know, for 80% of the schedule, we said, here's your shift. If you want to roll over, find somebody to trade. Every so often, if shifts come open because somebody leaves the company, we'll put those out to bid, but we don't force people to move anymore. We keep that 20% to be much more dynamic. And then one of the huge pieces that I didn't really talk about was we brought in a scheduler, and then now we have two, thankfully, that understood the concept of being dynamic, that can look at the pulse and say, okay, Saturday night, I'm going to need some people. You know, if I'm getting calls, I need to manage that. Sunday, it actually looks like we're gonna come in under workload, and so if I have call-offs, I don't need to worry about trying to fill those. That's how we kind of manage that a little bit. Or, you know, so-and-so, they were looking pretty pale yesterday. Why don't I just call them and see if they want to stay home today? The kind of thing that can still do a little banking with the employees to, you know that we're looking out for their well-being. Good. Great, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.